Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to The History of Horror Cinema, a personal podcast journey through the good, bad, and ugly of the history of horror movies, based on my blog, The History of Horror Cinema. The Raven, 1935. In 1935, the horror film continued its tentative cultivation of the literature of Edgar Allan Poe, with Universal's The Raven. The association with Poe's densely atmospheric source material would later flower into vibrant color in the 1960s through Roger Corman's collaborations with Vincent Price. But in this period, the writer's poems and short stories would be an inspirational springboard for Hollywood studios, with little attention paid to faithfulness to the source material. That said, in the case of this film, the central character is a deviant enthralled to his perceived idea of Poe the artist as a role model. The Raven exists as a shorthand symbol for death, with a couple of extended quotes from the titular poem's haunting musicality at points to suggest looming mortality. Directed by Lou Landers from a script credited to David Bohm but labored over by 8 writers, The Raven was a re-teaming of 3 Universal properties, in the forms of the writer, along with stars Boris Karloff, given top billing here and by his now trademark surname only, and Bela Lugosi, after they were combined in The Black Cat in 1934. Though billed second and accepting half the fee given to Karloff, the persistent rumors of jealous hostility from Lugosi still seem not to be borne out by accounts from both actors' families in later interviews. Lugosi was still the subject of some 200 reported fan letters a day from the ladies, the Washington Post claiming he was the reason also for a deluge of actresses wanting to play the female roles in the film. He also joined with Karloff in recruiting new members to the fledgling Screen Actors Guild. Karloff apparently was less than happy with the script and Universal at this point, but was careful to be a thorough gentleman with the cast and crew. The parts and the script make better use of the chemistry developed between the studio's men of horror in a spirited and fun vehicle for their talents, although somewhat ruinously controversial for its relish of torture, which seems to have played into Britain's temporary ban on horror films for a while afterwards. Lugosi channels his familiar aristocratic grandeur well as Dr. Richard Vollin, a celebrated surgeon tempted by an appeal to his ego to come out of retirement in order to operate on Jean, the car crash victim daughter of Judge Thatcher. Samuel S. Hines, a notable player for Frank Capra as Peter Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. Vollin is introduced as a devotee of Poe straight away by virtue of a silhouette of the symbolic bird, his talisman, as he intones part of the poem. Such is the renown for Vollin's Poe collection that a museum representative is prepared to pay handsomely for it. Death is my talisman, the one indestructible force, he muses, an obsession frequently embodied in the actors' roles that will pervade the rest of the film. Lugosi becomes partner in crime with Karloff when his successful operation leads to an all-consuming desire for Jean, ex-Miss America Irene Ware, thwarted by her father. Jean is something of a tease, dancing a special Raven-themed performance in the theatre to show her appreciation, yet seemingly blithe to the flames of passion lit within Vollin while she has Lester Matthews as her bland but loyal fiancé Jerry. When the judge visits Vollin to persuade him to stay away from her, Vollin's possessive ego seethes. "Send her to me, I warn you." Karloff, as San Quentin escapee Edmund Bateman, comes to Vollin for plastic surgery help with his ugliness, voicing the theme of outward unsightly appearance manifesting inner evil, much as how Richard of Gloucester would justify his murderous swathe of ambition in Richard III. Here, Karloff earns our immediate sympathy in a different way to Shakespeare's villain, with his characteristic lugubrious sensitivity, an impressive quality even allowing for Bateman's criminal past as a bank robber who acetylene torched a teller's face. "Sometimes you just can't help things like that," he remarks furtively. A great dynamic is set off between Karloff and Lugosi, sparking off their natural respective high and lower status against each other. Volin tricks Bateman into an operation that, instead of improving his looks, truly disfigures him, with facial scarring and a lopsided mouth to his face screen's left side, and what looks like a left eye unsettlingly painted onto the eyelid by makeup master Jack Pierce for a glassy, uneasy stare. Bateman is reduced to an impotent, fist-shaking "Ugh" that recalls his Frankenstein monster's heart-rending suffering. The Hungarian's imperiousness dominates the Englishman's tall yet bowed meekness, while both boil with suppressed feeling, Volin for revenge and entitlement to own Jean as his Lenore, Jean as imprinted version of the narrator's beloved in the poem, and Karloff tormented by the conflict between his conscience and fulfilling Volin's grisly plot. Volin sends out party invites to Thatcher, Jean, Jerry, and others on a pretext to bring Jean to his home. Clearly he has murder and Poe-influenced torture on his mind, showing the appalled Bateman his impressive dungeon of sadistic devices influenced by the writer, including a bench with a swinging axe overhead, later indelibly portrayed in Corman's take on the pit and the pendulum. Bateman's disgust is such that he traps Volin on the bench, but in vain. Volin's blackmail hangs over him more portentously than the blade. The scene is set for what would be an ordinary third-act rerun of the old Dark House plotting, were it not for the pace being nicely ratcheted up by Volin's gadgetry, extending to Jean's room being built as a giant descending elevator to his lair, and a room with inward-closing walls. Lugosi savours the forthcoming murder of them all, Thatcher strapped under the pendulum axe, with a marvellous Cheshire Cat grin. I like torture. The principal cast of innocents are all placed in Republic serial-style peril, intercut with Bateman eventually succumbing to his good nature to free them, earning a bullet from Volin for his sabotage, yet with enough mortal energy left to dispatch Lugosi into his own pressing engagement before they both die. Whilst The Raven was filmed in only a little more than 2 weeks, it holds up surprisingly well, principally due to Karloff and Lugosi's byplay. Inevitably, their chemistry as studio horror figureheads was still to be exploited in future releases. In 1963, Roger Corman would rework the Raven idea as an unconnected comedy, casting Karloff again and having him share the film's dark humor with Peter Lorre and Vincent Price.